Washington, D.C. is my home away from home. I've worked here for the better part of 3 decades as a founder, entrepreneur, policy expert, and author.
Probably the longest title. Everybody sort of shortened it to ONC for sanity's sake.
Mercifully.
Yeah, mercifully.
I've learned leadership secrets from many healthcare executives who understand that Washington is the largest payer and regulator of healthcare.
She said, well, because you'll never get a husband if you do that.
I began interviewing healthcare leaders many years ago because what better way to learn how they think, why they make it to the top, and how they remained there. Think about what was your most challenging engagement.
Healthcare has been the most difficult problem. Let me just say that.
We'll talk about that later. The Health Information Management and Systems Society, known as HIMSS, melds healthcare and information technology in one very large setting. We invited 3 healthcare and IT experts, Dr. Suchi Saria, Kaveh Safavi, and John Glaser, to discuss healthcare and IT trends and highlights and innovations coming out of HIMSS-22. We explored health IT issues like interoperability, the cloud, remote monitoring, and what was new and not so new on the HIMSS floor. One new topic was caregiver turnover and shortages, which the panel thought were underrepresented. HIMSS showcased the cutting-edge applications of AI and automation. We discussed their use cases and the new challenges these technologies are facing, such as usability, privacy, security, regulations, and data bias. For all healthcare leaders, the panel believes that it is fundamental to understand how quickly technology is revolutionizing healthcare. Well, good afternoon, John and Suchi and Kaveh, and welcome. We're pleased to have you at this microphone, and we'd love to get your views on the key takeaways and trends of HIMSS. We'll talk a bit about a new meeting called Vive later, but let's focus on HIMSS now. And I asked earlier, but let's go back. So when was the first HIMSS meeting that each of you went to? John, we'll start with you.
Oh, it was 1989. So and that was at the time the attendance at the conference was about 4,000 people. And we were thrilled that there was a 25% year over year increase.
Yeah. And now it's, I don't know what it was this year, Suchi, they were saying, I guess, 27,000, but it has been a lot more than that in the past. Suchi, when did you first start going?
So I went to the first HIMSS, I think 2011.
Okay. And Kaveh?
About 2002.
Okay. So we've got a pretty good strain. I started right about the same time John did, by the way. Well, why don't we start off with the value of HIMSS? It's a large meeting focused on health IT. What do each of you find as the value of HIMSS when you attend? John, let's start off with you if we could.
Well, I think, Gary, the value of HIMSS, but like the value of Chime or the value of a number of associations, you bring the community together. And you cement relationships that are in place, because sometimes this is the only time you see people is once a year. You form new relationships. I always think you did well if you pick up 5 or 6 pearls or insights along the way. You get a feel for the floor and this, that, and the other. But it energizes the community and enables them to have a certain set of conversations. 10 years ago is meaningful use. What's the deal with that? This year, a lot of discussion on fire and AI, et cetera. But if nothing else, bring the community together as a community to live and to learn and to reestablish relationships is always a very useful thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Suchi, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I really, so with my background, I used to go to, and I still do, go to a lot of academic meetings in MLAI and academic meetings in medicine. Moving to sort of more of an industry conference where I would mostly attend to give talks. I think this year was super interesting because I felt as AI/ML is moving from research into the front line, I think 5 years ago, if I walked down one of these industry conferences, it felt like, I think if I may say so, many experts would roll their eyes with hearing the things they were hearing in terms of marketing. And I felt like it was really exciting to see more and more of ideas actually turning into practical things that people are starting to implement and adopt. So actually walking down the aisle was kind of a very beautiful, easy way to get a preview of what is actually happening in the practical realm. How are people adopting it? What are ways in which people are adopting it? How are they talking about it? Where are the gaps? So in 2 days, you could kind of get a preview extremely fast.
Mm-hmm. Kaveh, we'll let you back clean up here. How do you think about value of a HIMSS meeting?
For the most part, I've gone really through the view of a sponsor and a company for the trade show. So for me, it's predominantly a trade show. I've been going for 20 years. By the time I started going, I already had some knowledge of the sector, but I did take personal advantage of the learnings. But I'd say for the last at least decade, my view has largely been about how you would approach an event like that to meet your trading partners. And as a trade show, you spend more of your time focusing on selling partners rather than buying partners. At least that's the experience that I have, and that continues to be the case.
Let's look at this a bit differently. We had the HITECH Act passed roughly, 13 years ago, 2009. John mentioned meaningful use, but what contribution has HIMSS made to the field of health IT, do you think? Kaveh?
Well, again, from the perspective that I take, it is without any question the single largest healthcare IT trade show. And to the extent that in any kind of an industry where you have that kind of adoption, every one of those industries needs a place for convening, not because you can't go out of your way to make individual meetings, but because the idea of having everyone together at one place creates an opportunity not only for planned but unplanned interactions, which become the basis for partner relationships. I think it's critical. And because we're moving into an environment where no single entity has the answer, the technology solutions are increasingly ecosystem and partner driven. So the value of places to find partners just goes up.
Suchi, how about you? You're on a cutting edge in a lot of the work you do, so that you might look at HIMSS a bit differently, but what has HIMSS contributed to the field?
Yeah, I think, like Kaveh said, the fact that so many different people are coming together and learning each other's language is so key, and we need more of that. A little bit of a flip point of view, I felt like the size of the conference did feel quite overwhelming. It was smaller this year than past years, but what that meant is it felt a little bit like a zoo. And, you really sort of had to come in with an agenda of what you're hoping to accomplish, because there's so much going on. For example, I spent a lot of time at the AIML forum. Maybe it was about 1,000 people, roughly. I had a chance to give a talk at the AIML forum, which was super fun and really got very engaging questions. And one thing that I really loved about it was that compared to other meetings, this particular one felt like people were just much further. They'd worked on ideas, they'd implemented ideas, they'd understood where things break, and they were very prepared to hear about how to go about tackling these issues. And they just felt like they were very grounded and not just theoretical. So it was really, really fun to be able to engage with that audience. So I think that breakout group was great. And so the extent to which there can be more breakout groups always helps. But it did feel quite, there were people I wanted to meet, we met, but it just felt as a meeting extremely large. I'm curious to hear what John thinks, because, he was on the HIMSS board. So this is, in a way, your baby to some extent, growing to the size it has. What do you think?
Well, it was at its peak, it was in the low 40s, 40,000, and it was overwhelming. It was a zoo, trying to get a cab to get to the restaurant. Good luck in a variety of ways after certain meetings, et cetera. So, and I think, clearly it's added to the industry. It's kind of hard to know how much. Different meetings have different purposes. You go to Chime, it's much more intimate. It's with people who are your colleagues or CIOs or, CFO or CMOs or whatever. You go to AMIA for the informatics, the more academic. I'm sure, Suchi, you have certain things you go to in the ML community, which are targeted, et cetera. This is the big tent. And I think you can always advance the cause. You have to be focused, to Suchi's point about who you're going to meet with and Kaveh's point and why, et cetera. But nonetheless, people are learning from each other. People are forming partnerships and relationships that kind of glue in the engine that makes things happen and across the board. So, it's kind of hard to put a sort of definitive figure other than, in the course of, major undertakings of, moving an industry, it takes a lot of people working together and going in the same direction and teaching each other. And this is a sort of, new agar, for lack of a better word, that enables all this stuff. So I always thought there's enormous power bringing people together, a little bit of structure, and let them mingle. Do amazing things.
Well, the COVID question is, how did it feel to be with 20,000 of your closest friends?
I'll actually take that one because it's super funny. I was in Florida for a couple of meetings right before that, including Vive, and I don't know if it had something to do with the pollen or something else, but I definitely triggered my allergy and I was coughing a little bit, and I felt terrible being in the room coughing. Where I'm pretty sure people, I had taken the negative COVID test and everything, but that doesn't preclude, in that meeting when you're sitting at the table and you have to cough, even with your mask on. I was definitely feeling bad for the people around me.
Yeah, you're probably less likely to get a screwy eyeball than if you smoked a cigarette in the middle of a meeting. Both of those, you're a leper of some form.
Kaveh, is that the largest meeting you've been to since COVID?
I was at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona 2 weeks ago. It's normally 120,000. It was a 50,000 person meeting. But we had masks at Mobile World, and now we're mask optional. So I would say it was about as normal, sort of a pre-2020 event as I've been to since March of 2020. And I would say that there was a very clear sense from most people that they wanted to be in a congregate setting. For my own practice, which is highly distributed, I have thousands of people that are never in the same place at the same time. These meetings have always been an essential part of our familial relationship. And for us, it was like homecoming. I mean, we went out of our ways to spend time with each other and go out to dinner together, just us, because it was a family reunion. We'd only seen each other on camera for 2 years.
Very cool. Well, what about trends? So what are the trends that you all picked up? Were there any new trends, or was it just existing trends that we've been familiar with over the last several years?
I'm happy to just sort of give a couple of thoughts on this. The first one, which is that apparently everybody uses the same people for their marketing, because if you just walk down the middle of the aisle and you look, the same 4 words show up on everybody's list. And what's quite funny, actually, is how the same words can appear in branding statements all over the place. So, I understand in a way why that is, but when you walk down and you see them all in front of you at once, you realize that the idea of being distinctive is actually something that probably deserves a little attention, rather than using words that you're used to hearing other people use. One of the things I think that's interesting about HIMSS is that by its very nature, it tends to focus on what we typically describe as mature technologies. We think about technologies via an S-curve, and most of the real money is spent on mature technologies, but a lot of the interesting conversations occur on the ascending limb of the S-curve, and then the really interesting ones at the bottom of the S-curve. At HIMSS has always been about sponsors and companies, so it tends to live at the top end of the S-curve. The startups are sort of all the way over in one corner and not really central. And so people either seek that or don't see it, which is interesting. But I think there was something really interesting about this HIMSS, and it has nothing to do with HIMSS. It has to do with timing, which is that HIMSS is planned out a year, whatever, in advance. But for healthcare, and particularly healthcare delivery, the rapid ascendancy of staffing as a problem, and the staffing shortage is a problem, and healthcare costs related to payroll costs has moved up the list of priorities ahead of marketing and ahead of assets. So while you see a lot of technology that talks about how to make healthcare better, when you have conversations with people about the problems they want to solve, it's actually how do we solve for the fact that we don't have enough people to do the work. That's not what the products and the booths are organized around right now. And I think that to me was most interesting, and something I share with my colleagues, which is that there's the topic du jour is moving pretty fast right now because of context.
I'll add to what Kaveh said. Actually, I totally agree with him around it was, again, going down the exhibit hall. It felt like it was nuts how much money had gone into those booths, those, like flying saucers everywhere and all sorts of things to be able to get attention and to stand out. One thing I empathized with deeply was I was trying to think about, again, from having worked in the field for a long time and walking down the aisle, I was like, oh my gosh, if I work a lot with chief clinical officers, chief medical officers, chief quality officers, and CIOs. And I was walking down the aisle and I was like, if I was in their shoes walking down, holy majoli, I would be overwhelmed because it's so unclear what is real, what is not. And then the other piece, I was very pleasantly, this has been sort of a little bit in the last couple of years already starting to bubble up. And because of staffing being such an issue, the importance of augmentation, the importance of automation. So I felt like I saw much more real emphasis, and maybe my eyes go there more quickly, but much more real emphasis on AI, not in a hypey sense alone. I mean, of course, when you're in a vendor meeting, there's going to be hype everywhere. But going beyond the hype, there were also very real ideas and real results and real, like there were good groups doing high quality things, which was very exciting to see.
Yeah, I think, Gary, it's hard. I mean, one of the things that HIMSS has done for years is they poll attendees about top 10 issues. And what's interesting is year over year, those issues move all over the place. So usability is high one year, drops down here, and anything's, and you think, golly, how could this be? Like we solved it last year, and so we no longer need to talk about it. And so part of it's a little fickle in some ways. But nonetheless, I think you can see a mixture of things. So you see, one year you'll see issues that just really weren't there the year before. I mean, so I go back to meaningful use. In 2008, it wasn't there, but 2009, it sure was. This year, health equity and the digital equity is clearly on the map. It was not there, last year or the year before. So all of a sudden things emerge for whatever set of reasons. Similarly, you get these kind of bubbling issues that all of a sudden take off, like fill in the blank, telework, telehealth. It's been around, but all of a sudden it really took off, et cetera. And then you see to Suchi's point, the steady maturation of AI and ML. It just keeps maturing along the way. So you get this kind of interesting mixture of things where you said, I could see it 5 years ago. It's just further along. And other stuff that says I could kind of a glimmer 5 years ago, but man, we're on a kind of an S curve. And the other kind of stuff is where in the world did this come from? Now, you know where it came from, but all of a sudden it's there. I mean, there were, one of the things that was kind of really a lot of attention this year was interoperability, FHIR, because there's the FHIR mandate by the end of the year. And all of a sudden the information blocking rule is kicking in here. And all of a sudden TEFCA. That sort of way we're going to get the network of networks is, and there's all, I think sometimes in healthcare, we wait till the last minute to do something. And all of a sudden it's the last minute. And so there's a lot of anxiety about this. So anyway, you get this kind of mixture of issues popping up and going away and setting mixture, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, like John said, there was a lot of virtual care discussion, which was interesting. And it was kind of fun because there's a little bit of like in the moment when you're responding, it's much easier to do that with marketing. It's harder to do that with product. It takes a long time to build the product to work correctly. It's much easier to put a nice glossy white paper to talk about it. So there was definitely a lot of glossy on like virtual care and how virtual care could look. I don't know if you're seeing the right virtual care of the future today, but we're definitely seeing a lot of glossy on it.
If AI was just 100% diffused throughout, that would be some point in the future. What percentage would we be at now? 10%, 20%, 30%?
Yeah, I think what I'm starting to see at least is maybe like pretty much across the continuum, like examples all the way from like pathways, clinical trial recruitment, falls detection, clinical augmentation, earlier stages like falls, sepsis, areas where I work a lot in, administrative cases, billing, virtual care, at-home care. So I feel like we've gone from sort of hypothetically talking about it to more results. And I'm seeing early results in a number of these areas. In some cases, we're starting to now see these early results make their way across systems. And I'd really say, like, because of the staffing shortage issue, over the last year, my sense is, like John said, some things rise very quickly through the S-curve. If we can succeed in demonstrating that we actually can tangibly solve for augmentation effectively with AI/ML deployed correctly, I think that's going to be an example of a place where we'll see a climb through the S-curve very, very fast. But yeah, it did feel like 2030 is maybe what I'd say where we are. We're not at 0, we're not at 5, we're not at 10. I think there's great desire to help understand how to implement it. But I think there are relatively, still not as, many groups are attempting to work in it, but not as many groups with deep expertise.
I would defer to Suchi and Kaveh on this. I mean, I think it's a hard question to answer because there are parts where it's really far along. I mean, golly, the voice recognition and checking emotion and also, facial recognition. Yeah, I get the biasing, but still, it's pretty far along. Or, my old Siemens days, you have the AI in the equipment that says, by the way, this thing's about ready to go south unless you do something. Or in a lot of administrative stuff, staffing, prior authorization, et cetera, say, wow, we're making some pretty good progress here. On the other hand, you say, to what degree are docs using it daily in the course of clinical practice? Well, maybe not so much. So it's a little uneven across the board. And I also think, at times we have to remember this is, an algorithm is not a solution, which is not a company. And so you get a lot of algorithms out there, pretty cool now, whether they've been tested well, separate question, et cetera. But you can get a lot of energy on, I did this algorithm and it looks pretty damn slick. But that doesn't mean you got a solution here. And that doesn't mean you got a company. So you can say, how far along in the algorithm? Well, do a lot of cool things. How far along in the companies? Well, there's a funnel going on here. And then last point, and then turn over to my colleagues who know more than I do. I always sometimes think that nobody buys AI. They buy something else that performs better because of AI. And so they buy a revenue cycle system that is smarter because of AI, or they buy a, radiology imaging system. So the real question is, well, I'm buying, imaging capabilities or revenue cycle, and you've got AI. Why is your product better? Because of this. So anyway, that's what you buy. It's you buy a car that's safer because of AI.
Kaveh, what do you think?
I think we're in the same zone here, Suchi. I was saying, I was going to say second or third inning in a 9-inning game, so on the same order of magnitude. I think about it largely as particularly machine learning. It's pretty pervasive as an analytic capability now. That's kind of the know part of the world, but there's a real opportunity is really in the act and the do part of the world. It hasn't really made its way much into workflow and workflow substitution. I think there's huge amount of opportunity there. And that's going to first show up on the cognitive side. And I think we've wildly underestimated its value around the physical side of work because there's a lot of task substitution that needs to occur on the physical side. So people are aware of it, but I think there's still a lot of distance between the full benefit we're going to get. So opportunity.
We've got administrative use for, finance and so on, but Suchi, could you share with us your thoughts about the clinical uses of AI, which may be in a different place than some of the administrative uses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like John said, right, people are buying something because of a problem you're solving rather than the AI bit of it. And so then what are the problems we're seeing now, right? So a huge aspect of it is, like last year we saw, staffing shortages coupled with significant drops in quality, safety, outcomes plummeted last year. What we're also going to see as a result is risk. We're also seeing a lot of emphasis continuing, not sudden surprise, but shift towards pop health. So what that means is, my sense is, things like patients at risk for adverse events that we can monitor and model and make it easy for a small set of team to be augmented to quickly respond. Managing at-risk contracts more confidently because you can identify patients who are at risk for getting admitted or readmitted and doing something about it. More patients are at home, or, there's a little bit more patients who are in the hospital and now heading home, and maybe previously they would have gotten the care inside the hospital. They're sort of starting to get more of that care at home. Naturally, the need is to stitch together that siloed, these two separate experiences into a single episode, to start thinking about how to do that transition more effectively, but also to more seamlessly monitor, because you can't have a full team at home in the same way you had them while you're in the hospital. So I see a number of use cases which pre-COVID were very much nice to haves and not something people were thinking about as hard, but now feels has become a very real thing. The extent to which health systems are already engaging and doing something about it, I think, is a secondary story, right? So I think this is where John and Kaveh were saying. My sense is like over the next couple of years, we will see how much this becomes a priority. How much are they really deeply engaging to actually do things differently as opposed to business as usual?
What about data? John mentioned we've got interoperability, some new standards at the end of the year. We've got data blocking as an issue that's being dealt with to some degree, at least. And obviously, AI, machine learning require data. So will these changes coming down the pike over the next 12 months or so, is that going to free up data, make more data available for the use of AI?
Well, so lots of certainly, I mean, there's a lot of raw material, but for it to be useful, there are a few things that have to happen. Like right now, one of the challenges we have, which we have to get our arms around it, is just because the data exists doesn't mean you're permitted to use it. And so dealing with privacy and consent is a non-trivial issue. That's a governance and a policy issue, not a technology issue. First becomes a technology issue, but it has an element there that's important. We understand that for AI to be trusted, one of the predicates is that the data cannot be biased. Well, the data that we have available is largely either a reflection of the way we do things or a sample that's available, both of which have bias associated with them. So we want a machine to make decisions based on what we put in, and by its very nature, it's biased. We build in a lack of reliability in our system. So we're going to need to solve for those problems. It's less about increasingly, it's less about the quantity and it's more about the heterogeneity as well as chronology. And so, I mean, for really interesting data in healthcare around a person, we have to get a complete picture of them, which won't come just from their clinical record.
I want to add to what Kaveh said. Actually, this is one of my favorite topics. I've spent a ton of time doing research in this and publishing in it. I think there's this misconception. So if you think about it as innings, if you will, initially I think we felt, oh my gosh, can we get the data? I think then the data became available. Then people started to think, oh my God, we need a lot of data to be able to do anything. Then the next state was realizing, oh my gosh, when we get a ton of data and we blindly just start putting black box methods, we end up getting methods that are not all that reliable. I'd say the next inning, and again, in research, we're further along than industry practices. The next inning in research, which is almost 4 or 5 years ago, was sort of recognizing that we need techniques that can really correct for these biases. So I'd say on the research side and state-of-the-art side, we actually have a fair number of techniques that know how to think about how to learn models that are reliable, how to measure for bias, how to monitor for bias, how to avoid solutions that create bias. But I wouldn't say all of these ideas have migrated widely into industry, where we're seeing a lot more. There's a very variable implementation of tools, and I think around this, we just sort of yesterday in Stat wrote an article. This is a new coalition we formed with a group of colleagues around trying to make some of these best practices clear. In my work with the FDA, we've brought some of these tools from the field and something they can use for starting to, make it easier to monitor and evaluate efficacy, right? And we use a lot of these ideas within the company, Bayesian Health, that I founded. But I definitely see that knowledge of these best practices are still very sparse, and something we're hoping as more, the Health AI Coalition we're part of, but as other groups come along, I think these best practices will start to become more visible and hopefully more uniformly implemented.
Gary, just to add to this, I mean, one of the things we get into this conversation every now and then is sort of data is data, sort of this homogenous, it's all the same. It ain't all the same. And in fact, some of the data, particularly depending on your use, you got the data you need now. You don't need any further interoperability if you're looking at predicting someone in the ICU, or whether they're going to head south or not, et cetera. So I think it depends on your purpose, whether or not there's a lot of data you're going to have, or whether it's good or not good, et cetera. I do think on the topic of interoperability, and a number of things are happening this year, which from the federal level will position us to make progress, whether it's the adoption of FIRE, or we'll beat you up if you don't, or TEFCO or the blocking rule, et cetera. And we'll see in the years to come how much the industry actually leverages that. Because actually, interoperability is a thing you decide to do. You decide to share data. It's not something that happens automatically because you got APIs, et cetera. And remember 2 years ago, actually looking at, well, what can we learn from banking or travel about interoperability? They're further along. And one of the things you learn is no industry is fully interoperable, not at all, et cetera. But where they are, they do three things. They focus on a narrow set of transactions which have value to all. So the SWIFT, which gets come up in the sort of Russian thing now, is sort of the exchange between banks. There's real value there. The second is where there's a real business case. Everybody's sitting around the table saying, I know what's in it for me, and I'm willing to pony up money and time and effort to make it happen. And the third is where there's a body that convenes everybody to hammer through the issues. So we'll see to what degree we as an industry, we're not going to share everything. It's never going to happen. But where will we focus, and how valuable will that be? And can we as an industry agree to go after prior authorizations, or other types of things that we go after? So we'll see. We'll see whether we mature along the lines that other industries have done, and we'll be further along. Will they be further along to everybody's purpose because of what they're trying to do for their algorithm or this, that, and the other? We'll see. We'll see.
The question, John, just to follow up on your point, is the government now, federal government, is not only the largest payer, but the largest regulator. And so that progress you're talking about seems to be heavily related to how capable the government is to move quickly or expeditiously. Is that right, John? Am I thinking about that the right way?
Well, I think they're clearly pick any country you want. The government is the most potent actor in healthcare because they're the largest employer. And so they're taking care of their folks. They're the largest provider of care. They're the largest purchaser of care. And then they have this role called, protector of the common good when the free market fails, so they'll step in and do certain things like that. It was interesting, Gary, spending a year at ONC to help put together the meaningful use regulations. And what was interesting to me is it has such power, because of what the rules said. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so one of the things that you have to do when you write the regulations, and the regulations take the law and translate it, well, here's what you got to do. Let's get real. What does meaningful use really mean, et cetera, is they have to send these things out for comment. They have to listen to the comments. They have lots of groups who come in and say, by the way, it should say this, it should say that, and this, that, and the other. And so they have to because it's government, and you have to listen to your people, et cetera. And you have to do it because it's called risk mitigation, because it's so easy to get it wrong. And man, it is hard to change regulation. You can really screw things up if you get it wrong. So you better subject it to lots of other pairs of eyes. But golly, Gary, that takes time. To write the rule, to put it out for comment, to entertain everybody, this, that, and the other. And then it takes time to figure out, well, we messed it up. We should have had a comma here, but you didn't. And it takes time to figure that out. And then it takes time to revamp the whole thing. So it is, because of its power, it's got this very deliberate risk management approach, and it's going to be slow. Period. And it will never have the sort of, like Suchi or Kaveh and their companies can move pretty darn fast because they don't have to deal with all this nonsense. So long-winded way of saying, it's got power. It's got to be very judicious and thoughtful about the use of that power, which means it's going to be deliberate.
That's well said. Let's turn to the EMR companies. Any advancements or new news out of the Epics and Cerners and Meditechs of the world?
Well, I think that the topic du jour right now is the idea that people are going to actually host their EMRs on public clouds. And that what's really driving it is they're trying to move their overall technology estate to a public cloud for primarily around resilience and cybersecurity and pace and their ability to innovate and connect to other partners. So not EMR per se, but because they need to do it. And if you're a healthcare provider and your EMR is not on a public cloud, you haven't moved to the public cloud enough. And so you see a lot of that dialogue and how that's going to play itself out at. And it's confounded by concepts of sovereignty globally, the lack of willingness of non-US countries to do business with US cloud providers is a complexity that is emerging, and it's only heightened by geopolitical things. So, just because it's possible doesn't mean it's permissible or doesn't mean it's politically viable. So we've got a lot of moving parts with respect to that. But I think that's kind of the topic du jour right now, at least one of them.
John and I are close to Cerner in different ways, each of us. But what's the scuttlebutt on the Oracle acquisition of Cerner? Any talking about that on the floor?
Oh, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, because it's big news and there's, sort of everybody's speculating about this, that, or the other. I don't know how well informed it is, Gary, but that shouldn't stop us. It's like speculating on The Bachelor, whether he's going to make a muttonhead choice or not make a muttonhead choice. And it turns out he made a muttonhead choice. But anyway, there was a lot of speculation about all that. So I think my sense is, that's obviously a topic. What does it mean? Where will it go? There's also the topic of Meditech and Google doing a partnership of some of the Google technology within Meditech. Et cetera. I think, frankly, the more interesting conversation, at least for me, and I'm not sure how much of it is really a floor conversation, is I think progressively what we'll see, Gary, is a series of sort of ecosystem of apps that surround the EHR, leveraging FHIR and this, that, and the other. It's like what you see in banking. The core transaction system remains. It doesn't mean that Epic and Cerner don't innovate. They continue to do that. But you'll see companies wrap around this kind of stuff. And that'll be an interesting phenomenon to see how well that really works and how vibrant is that ecosystem really in making this thing happen. Because, Cerner as well as I do, Gary, probably better. There's only so much innovation it can do, at a particular level. And it's the same with Epic. So I think the sort of broad trend is if you take the exhibit hall is how many people are actually able to make a real go of it, surrounding and sitting on top of Epic or Cerner or Meditech or eClinical Works, et cetera. And to what degree the doctors and the nurses say, man, this thumbs up. This works pretty well.
I think for that to happen, John, one of the things that'll be really, really crucial is for EMR companies to evolve their identity from being like the solution that they're competing for headspace to becoming enablers, right? Where they're seeing themselves as the information superhighway on which they can enable really, really fast, high quality traffic. I think that is an identity, we'll see if we actually, get there in healthcare. I think it's very important. It'll move. It'll be exciting. And I think I'd even say on the health, health systems, payers, I think they're at different ends of this journey of how they view it, the extent to which EMRs as the solution to all problems versus sort of their base layer infrastructure on which they will now start building an ecosystem of solutions to solve their problems.
I think sure Kaveh sees this, but I think two things will sort of force the issue. One of which is the Fed saying, you got to make it easier, man. And if you start throwing, things in the way here, we'll come beat you up. We'll penalize you. So the information blocking FHIR, that will just make it easier. The second is one of the things that I find, and I think Gary and Kaveh, you guys probably see this, is the health system is getting bigger. All the big players are getting bigger. And so what happens when you get bigger is you have the resources, the ability, and the belief, I can do my own thing. I'm not wholly reliant on Cerner, and I'm not wholly reliant on Epic. It's different if I'm a 200-bed hospital, man. You got me, okay? So I'm quite willing to say, Bisbee, here's the deal. You got to open it up because I want to do A, B, and C, and Bisbee will because, golly, you're a big customer, et cetera. So we'll see very sophisticated digital health IT people demand it, and we'll see the companies respond because that's what they do on these things. And I don't know, Kaveh may see this or not see this, but I suspect we'll get a more demanding customer.
I agree.
Let's move to Vive. Just briefly, Suchi, you were there. It's a new organization focused on digital health, it seems to me mostly, I think, but it has vendors there and it has users of one kind or another. Suchi, how did you find Vive? Give us a quick summary if you could.
Yeah, so I think this was my first time attending Vive. I don't know if it's the first Vive meeting. I think it may be. It was way smaller than HIMSS, so I don't know quite what the numbers were, but it seemed like maybe closer to 4,000, 5,000. In person, it hardly matters though, because you're seeing people around you at 5,000, you're seeing people around you at 26,000. It feels the same. There were some very marked differences in style. So, Vive was very much, let's start with the look and feel, like beautiful illustrations everywhere, a great DJ that set the mood, the entire time of the meeting. And so that sort of made it very fun, easy to be here, easy to mingle. in terms of content, I felt like Vibe was much, much more thick, positioning itself as sort of here's where the field is headed. So a little bit more like, so many more startups were there, many more talking about kind of the little bit less like vendor booth heavy and more conversation heavy and more sort of let's interact to like try to solve problems together, I felt.
I think that's a good summary. This has been an excellent interview. We really appreciate it. I've got one last question I'd like to ask each of you, and that is for the up-and-coming leaders that are watching the show. What's your advice for how familiar they should become with IT and digital health?
To me, it feels like the next 10 years is such an exciting time where IT's gone from just being plumbing, like basic plumbing in healthcare, for it to become the catalyst for really improving healthcare delivery and the business of healthcare delivery. So I'm hopeful, IT is no longer just a CIO issue. It really is an across the board care delivery, enabler, and people are educating themselves across the board, and we'll start to see companies at all sizes and scopes partner to be able to improve, health outcomes, make healthcare more effective, more efficient, more cut waste.
I think that we can't separate technology from business anymore. And because we can't separate it, everyone needs a level of technology literacy. We talk about this professionally now, but more importantly, you're talking about young people. We just talk about this as a group and what we want our kids to learn in college, regardless of their field. And I think we're getting to a place now where everybody has to have an understanding of how technology affects a business that is more than just simply the label, but actually have some understanding. They don't have to be coders, but I do believe that we're at a place now where you really can't either be a leader or a participant if you don't have, in our company, we call it a technology quotient or some version of technology literacy.
There's a study done, it actually came out in last year by MIT, looking at the impact of having digitally savvy leadership on transformation efforts. And so they looked across a range of companies. And, some of it was, well, what do you mean by digitally savvy? So, well, three things, one of which is they had a reasonable working level of knowledge about the AI. They could give you a credible description of AI. They could give you a credible description of blockchain. They had enough. Okay. They weren't, they're not going to go toe to toe. They had enough. Second is they had scar tissue from a major implementation. They knew what it meant to roll out an EHR revenue cycle and, how hard that is. This and that. Third is they had some experience with sort of piloting digital technology. Let's go try this. And so, good discipline and innovation management. So if you had those three, what you find is that they had a remarkable effect, surprise, surprise, on how well the digital transformation of the organization was going. Now, that assumes digital transformation is relevant. And I think in healthcare it is. In organized religion, not so much. But, nonetheless, it assumes relevant. And it was not only the savviness of leadership, it was certain practices they brought with them because of that. So they had an active, ongoing dialogue with the IT people where they were treated as peers. It was iterative, it was just nonstop, et cetera. They had a great way of sort of being learning. So they were open to trial. They were opening to minimal viable products. And they made sure that people were out in the industry, like these conferences, and really learning and sharing and being disciplined about learning. So actually, where's the evidence? Not just, golly, I talked to this person and Chuck believes this is going to happen. So Chuck knows everything. So they wouldn't go off and to do that. And they were pretty modular. They could actually, move people around. Golly, the winds are going this way versus that. We're going to redirect the budget. We're going to redirect the team, and away we go here. And the other thing, Gary, is they sort of push the responsibility down to the trenches. You all in the trenches, you're leading this thing. You know what the care is like. You know how to make it happen. I'm going to resource you. I'm going to coach you. If you step into crap, I'm going to get you out of there, et cetera. But I'm also holding you accountable, for getting the results here. So what you find is, to your point, yes, it matters. And there are certain specifics to it, but more than you being the chief smart person who's now digitally savvy, you bring certain practices with you, and you do the best that you can to get those across the organization.
Can I add, Gary, that if you believe in the metaverse, it's going to matter for organized religion as well at some point.
I hadn't even thought about that. Son of a gun. Yeah, like the psychedelic medication. I'm all for that. I'm not for it. Timothy Leary was right. I knew it.
Great way to end. And this has been a terrific panel. Thank you again. And by the way, why don't we do it again next year after HIMSS and see what's changed? Thank you all.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Suchi. Thanks, Kaveh.
Thank you so much.